Good evening. Welcome to tonight's segment of the Faculty Lecture Series. Those of you who don't know me, which I think you all do, right, I coordinate this, and I want to thank you for attending tonight's lecture. Keep an eye out for future announcements for upcoming lectures that I send out weekly. Next lecture will be next Thursday, October 6th in this room. Dr. Will Reed from Business will be presenting on how leaders enhance workplace psychological safety. Tonight's lecture is presented by Dr. Alex Vernon of Business. Dr. Vernon is a new professor at Adams State. He came here from Millikan University in Decatur, Illinois, where he was an associate professor of operations management. Before Millikan, he was professor of business at Missouri Southern State University in Joplin, Missouri, and he retired from Missouri Southern after almost 30 years of service. He has taught a variety of courses, including statistics, operation management, spreadsheet modeling, statistical quality control, supply chain management, project management, and organizational behavior at the undergraduate level, and data analysis, managerial statistics, data analytics, and research methods at the graduate level. It's a lot of math. It's a lot of numbers, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
During the spring semester of 2000, he taught spreadsheet modeling and quality control to students at Webster University in Geneva, Switzerland. He is an ASQ certified quality engineer and has delivered statistical process control and project management training to several organizations. He has given presentations of his research at national and international conferences and has been published in national and international journals. He holds a BS in mechanical engineering from the University of Tennessee, an MBA from the University of Mississippi, and a doctorate in qualitative analysis or management science from Louisiana Tech University. Before pursuing a career in higher education, he worked as an engineer for a large utility company. So help me in welcoming Dr. Vernon.
Thank you. So I really appreciate you guys showing up, the few and the proud here. I'll look forward to going to Will's next week and AJ's later in the term. Anyway, this research is from, this presentation has to do with some research that we did at Missouri Southern about 5 or 6 years ago. Little background on Missouri Southern. I was there for about 30 years. They helped me work on a doctorate. I didn't even get in the hole for it. They loaned us money, so it was a pretty good move for me. The regional universities in Missouri all kind of divvied up emphases. So Missouri Southern's president was from Chile originally, Dr. Julio Leon, and he wanted the international mission. He said, we'll take the international mission, which didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense for Joplin, Missouri. We've got an airport in Joplin, Missouri that's supported by taxpayer dollars to keep it going, kind of like we do here. And it's, I'm not going to say the middle of nowhere, but it's a crossroads. It's very much like Adams in many ways. It's bigger, but first generation college students, it's about 90% white. The other 10% used to be American Indian and black students, and now it's becoming more Hispanic because of all the immigration that we have for poultry processing, in particular in Southwest Missouri and Northwest Arkansas. But first generation students, I'm not going to say disadvantaged backgrounds, but usually not the best economic background. And so it didn't seem like the best fit. Jess mentioned the Webster University. Well, Webster University is in Webster Groves in St. Louis, a very affluent part of St. Louis. And all of the students that are traditional students at Webster are required to have at least a semester abroad, and they have multiple campuses abroad. So a completely different situation. I was one of the ones who was on the original committee for funding international initiatives. So we had, a pot of money to spread around to get faculty to travel and ultimately to get students to have international experiences. So ideally, we would love a semester abroad or a year abroad. That would be the kind of the gold standard of the international experience, or an internship. We've had some of those at Southern. But, a lot of first-generation students, well, they don't have a passport. Many of them haven't been on an airplane. lots of challenges. So what we found is that instructor-led trips, study trips that would have some meetings throughout the semester before the trip and a break, and would be on the order of 2 weeks-ish, that those really worked pretty well and often led to students having a semester abroad or something more intense. So also have a pretty good amount of international students at Missouri Southern. They've recruited them pretty well, which is a good idea. They pay more tuition than in-state students do, so it's not a bad idea. So we also had Missouri Southern. When I started there in 1988, was probably much like Adams in that we were probably just HLC accredited, but the School of Business wanted to go for a higher level of accreditation, ACBSP, not the AACSP, the highest one, kind of in between. So there was a little bit more pressure on us to do some publication. Not a lot of publication. We weren't grading the journals. We weren't, getting real, sophisticated with it, but something, so refereed conferences, journal publications, etc. So I, went to a teaching institution, so I don't really have this stream of research like a proper academic ought to have. So I go after low-hanging fruit. And my favorite way to do any sort of research is to write an abstract to a conference. And then if they take it, then I have to do it. Just you put your back up against the wall. And then often the conferences will lead to, most conferences have a professional society with a journal of some sort, so that can lead to some publications. It's a pretty low impact way to do that kind of stuff. Now, I used to get a lot of email. I've changed email from Southern, so I don't get nearly as many emails from conferences and so forth. You get on one list and you get on another list. So I'm reading email and I run into an article that has to do with barriers to study abroad. And I look at the article. It's not a very long article, and I'll go into it a little bit, and I see holes in it. Jess mentioned that I taught some research methods and so forth for the University of Maryland University College, a distance program. And one of the things we would hammer is, external validity. And so I always look at the sample and see whether I think the sample is generalizable to the population. And that was one of the things I saw a hole in this research. So that's paper's co-authors, Chris Moose, who's recently retired from Missouri Southern. Chris Moose recently retired. He was in business for a long time. He was in the Navy. He's married to a Ukrainian, and he is recently retired, and he was, a good co-author. So he came into Missouri Southern after a pretty good career in industry and a lot of travel. And he speaks Russian, and he's traveled all over Europe in particular. Very, very smart guy. Holly Long-Carrick is now a professor at Kansas State. She was our student worker. This was Chris's student worker. So her part was basically keying the data from the surveys. Maybe did a little bit of the editing and so forth, but that was pretty much her role in this. But we were able to bring a student in, and I think whenever you can involve a student in some research, it's probably a good idea, especially if you think they may want to go to graduate school. My daughter, this is a side, my daughter is a geological engineer working in Northern California now, recently graduated from Missouri S&T. She actually got to be on a project with the professor and some doctoral students and so forth, and did programming and so forth. So I didn't get any pubs last year, but she did. So somebody got in the books in the family. And I don't know whether it helped find the job or not, but the fact that she can program in GIS and, map earthquake faults and stuff like that's pretty handy. So we had a team working on this. I pretty much, I had the initial idea. Chris had lots of information about international study abroad. He had written a dissertation using some of the scales that we used. So he had quite a bit of lit review, and I pretty much ran the data, did the results, methodology, that kind of thing. So we've written 2 or 3 papers together, and it's worked out really well because we both have something that's a little bit different to contribute. So it's very much a team thing. So this paper has been it's in a journal. It's not a high-end journal, but it's been published. So our goal always is to have students, get involved with international study experiences. So the initial idea was from an article that I read by Gordon, Patterson, and Cherry, and it's from the same journal that our publication is in. So it was kind of followed up, sent it to the same place. And this journal, these authors were, for the most part, from southeast Missouri State, which also is in the middle of nowhere. It just happens to be in the Mississippi Delta, over near that end of the state. So what they did was survey study abroad officers, people that are involved in institutions, and ask them what they thought the barriers to students studying abroad were. So they had 10 in the U.S., 10 in Europe. Not very big. And they just ranked these barriers. And so here's the slide that shows, it's hard to see, but essentially they just had not at all a barrier, somewhat a barrier, a large barrier. So this is ordinal level data. I mean, we've got 3 categories. You can't capture a whole lot of variation with just 3 categories. So notice the barriers that would keep people from doing it: finances, fear, family, friends, lack of departmental support, from the school, relevance, course availability abroad, and that's particularly important. Most of the international students, for example, will go a whole semester abroad or a year abroad. The American students, not so much, especially from the type of student population that we had at Missouri Southern. It's just too many responsibilities in many cases to do that. Destinations are important. The grading system in Europe obviously is different than the grading system in the United States. Often you'll see students taking things pass-fail and just bringing it in differently, to avoid that. But those could be concerns. Now, so Gordon and his crew essentially concluded, and these are we could all tell you this. The finances are a barrier. Institutional support's important. Fear can be a barrier also, because especially if you look at students like we had at Missouri Southern, which is largely a commuter college. Haven't been on an airplane, many cases haven't been very far away from home, period. A few hundred miles, maybe to Florida, but Texas, Florida, that kind of stuff. So there were a little bit of differences in the opinions of the U.S. and the European respondents. So that would indicate their conclusion that you need to have customized approaches for the different student profiles that you actually have. Now, so I mentioned external validity. So I'm thinking, you're talking about barriers for students traveling, and you're asking study abroad officers. Why not ask the students? So there's a key difference if we're going to generalize to a student population. Sample size, theirs was small. We had 10 officers in the U.S., 10 in Europe. That's not very big. So let's get more data. And this ranking methodology, you can do some non-parametric statistics to it if you want to bad enough. You can beat the crap out of the data until it tortures and gives up something. But if you've got Likert scale data, even though it's technically interval, we treat it as if it's not. Ordinal, we treat it as if it's interval. So anyway, we can do a little bit more. So I don't know why that's in there. So we developed an 11-item scale to get at, they had 9 barriers. We added a couple of extra items to it. We cast these as 1 through 7 Likert scale data. We also threw in an international study expectancy scale. ISIS, and that's something that Chris had used in his dissertation about students' attitudes and concerns about study abroad. So we had that scale. He had that one in the bag. And, we had a pretty high, reliability coefficient on that, So the barrier items are listed, and I can provide the PowerPoint if anybody wants it, or even the article. But so we had items: cost, wages, university support, personal safety concerns, would their family be concerned about their safety? This is a different variable, the short trip variable. I like to go on short trips by myself, and I came up with that one thinking that would be measuring how independent they were. We all know people who can't drive to get something to eat by themselves. I knew people that were classmates in college. They'd starve before they'd walk to the cafeteria and get a meal by themselves. We're talking about 18, 19-year-old people. So there are people that way. Wanted to try to capture that. Going with people they know. So they, not going to be alone or rooming with somebody that's uncomfortable, et cetera, on a, study abroad trip. Getting time off of work, family responsibilities. So all of those were on a, 1 through 7 Likert scale. So we administered this to 155 undergraduate students. That's Missouri Southern, the moderately selected medium-sized school. Right now, at the time, Missouri Southern would have probably been about 5,500 in the fall. 1,000 of them business majors. Now enrollment's down 20-some-odd%. They're down sub 4. They had to let people go last year. It was a pretty serious drop in enrollment. So with this particular paper, I decided to go really simple. Just descriptive statistics and correlation coefficients. I have run regression models on part of it. I have done factor analysis on part of it. And if I need a paper, I've got one back here that I can pull out and send somewhere. I don't need one right now, so I'm not going to send one anywhere. But we've got the data. So, median age 21. Only 4 over the age of 30. Roughly 50-50 males and females. Southern is kind of like most universities in that you do have more females than you have males. But that's the way this particular thing shook out. 70, almost 3/4 business and technology majors. The school, it's now the School of Business and Technology. We've got engineering, technology, and so forth under the umbrella there at Southern. And the reason it's that way is we went to a study abroad fair that they have every year where people are promoting the trips. We tried to collect data there. We didn't have enough, so we used some of our classes. So this is a convenient sample. I can't say that it's perfectly representative of Missouri Southern. So, and we had 78 semester hours. You can see the quartiles there. So, people were in the junior range for the most part. And typically, I haven't got data to support this, but most of the time you're going to have sophomores, juniors, and seniors, typically not freshmen that'll go on these trips. That's more juniors and seniors than anything else, at least at Missouri Southern. Yeah. So I've got a whole table where I've basically got the frequencies of the responses in all the different categories to the Likert scaled items. And I decided to, sum up the somewhat agree, and the strongly agree, and the agree and the strongly agree. And you can see the percentages that fell into those different categories. So the initial interpretation of the results is just to look at the frequencies and just use descriptive statistics. I love me some hypotheses, but still, there ain't nothing wrong with descriptive statistics. They're pretty powerful things. So what we basically concluded, obviously monetary barriers have an impact. So the cost of it and lost wages, they have similar profiles. Getting time off work is not greatly different either. And of course, this makes you think a little bit ahead to factor analysis. What's going to load up, and be, to reduce that scale. 11 item scale is not very much, but hey, if you can take it down to 5 or 6, save some items, you might get better response rates. So they're definitely more interested, according to the ISIS measure, if the barriers questions, if we reduce the financial burden. And we had done that historically. Typically, Missouri Southern would fund roughly the plane ticket to everybody, and then the students would have to come up with everything else. It didn't always work out to a plane ticket, depending on the trip. European trips cost more. If somebody wants to get Asia, it costs a heck of a lot more. If they want to go to Scandinavia, if they're going to go to Central America, or Mexico or something, it's just going to cost less. So it didn't always work that way, but that was kind of our goal as a committee. Students needed to have skin in the game, but we wanted to make it something that was doable if they started raising money or saving over time. So anyway, more interested with financial support, definitely is most important, which, that's a gee whiz thing. And you could say, yeah, well, hell, I knew that, but I got data to support that. So there is a little difference in that. Safety concerns, about 1/3 said they would be concerned about personal safety. And I forget what happened in 2018 or so. There was an event. This was done before an event that happened with some study abroad students. Every now and then something happens, to make people more concerned about their safety. This was before. So only about 1/3. And then, most of them said that their family would be pretty concerned, which seems reasonable. So that tells you that you may need to address that also, especially for relatively young students. Because we certainly would have some that would travel that wouldn't be 21 yet. And so that would make a difference. Some were concerned about their GPA, but not so many, that it really would affect their GPA. And frankly, we mitigated that by often making the course so it would be a pass-fail or something like that. And it really wouldn't affect someone's GPA. The students that would be more concerned, just anecdotally without evidence, would be the ones that are actually going to study abroad for a semester, especially in a foreign language. Now, they're going to be fairly concerned. That's a big jump. We don't have very many students that do that. Some will do it in Spanish, from Missouri Southern. So here's a big table of correlations and p-values, and I've summarized some of those. Essentially, we didn't have any individual, Pearson correlation coefficients that were that high, moderate at best. A lot of them statistically significant, and you guys all know why. That would be because we've got 155 observations. You get enough observations, you can get statistical significance. That's pretty much going to happen. So, the correlation between lost wages and time off, okay, that makes sense that those would be highly correlated. They still get it financed. Other correlation greater than 0.5, the safety concerns. I'm concerned about my safety, and my family would be concerned about my safety. So that kind of gives you an idea. You might have a safety factor and a financial factor later on if you want to do factor analysis on it. Correlations between the barriers and the intent to study abroad measured by the ISIS scale. So you get pairwise correlations with 11 barriers and the 1 scale. And essentially, you've got ISIS positively correlated, the interest in international study, financial support, the liking trips alone, which is an independence variable, I would argue, and then the international experiences that are being offered to the students. So some are just way more interesting than others to the students, cooler place to go. In the business school, Chris was really good about coming up with business tours, and a lot of them were in Eastern Europe. You go to the Czech Republic, you go to Poland, Hungary, etc. Completely different than just going to the UK. Not that that's a bad thing. I like the UK fine. So the other ones where you have some negative correlation, and a few of the items were negatively worded. So you have to look at exactly how they were worded. But essentially some correlations with an impact on the GPA, again, safety, cost, family concern, lost wages. You still get into, financial concerns and the safety concerns that show up. I rank those as far as absolute correlation. None of these are very high. You're looking at weak. The highest one's weak. So anyway, so all the correlations are reported. And the basic takeaways is what you would expect pretty much from the descriptive statistics. If we provide financial support, more students are going to be interested in traveling. And it's not just about the money. It also says that you're willing to support it, you value it, so forth. And then, if the university is investing, they feel, very much that the university values it. Okay, they don't really want to go alone. They like to go with a group. They like to have people in the group that they know, not just a group where they're just a random member in there. So you can go after this with some strategies. You can have ample time with interaction in group meetings. Most of these instructor-led study abroads really started meeting, throughout the entire spring semester for the most part, and then culminate with the trip that's usually between the end of spring semester and the start of summer school. That's when most of them go. And typically you have different departments are offering different things, and so you have students that know each other and know the professors anyway. So it works pretty well. It has worked well for them at Southern. Okay, not really concerned about their GPA. Students aren't concerned about their safety, but their family would be concerned. And that's kind of a redundant statement at the end. So we can address safety concerns by, interacting with the family, lots of education about the area that you're in, even discussing how you travel in a city. Because at Missouri Southern, we've got students that have never been on a bus. They haven't been on a train. They can't read a bus schedule. They can't read a train schedule because they've never had an opportunity to learn how to do it. So they've even had some training and say, yeah, this is what the schedule to the tube looks like. These are what these things mean. And, show them around a little bit. And almost all the trips, they'll have a free day or two. You kind of turn them loose and you pray for the best. When they take, if groups are more than, for every 10 they would send an extra person. So if you almost always want to have 2 people, because they have had people that have had issues and have had to have somebody fly back with them. In Geneva, I had 15 students that went with us in 2000. They stayed in some university housing that wasn't Webster's, but they just have some in Geneva. They went all over the damn place. We lost one guy. He was AWOL for like 4 or 5 days. We didn't know where Gabe was. Gabe had got his pack confiscated by border guards in Hungary, going to Budapest. And he was going to go back and get his pack. And I talked to a Hungarian professor that was at Webster, and he says, they're fierce, the border guards. He questioned that. And I thought I was going to have to go find this guy because none of his guys knew who he was. And it turned out he emailed Chad Stebbins, who was our director of the International Institute at Missouri Southern, because all right. And then Chad emailed me, he's so-and-so. He's in an internet cafe somewhere. I think there was a female involved with this that he had met somewhere. I think that's what, motivated him to go into a dangerous situation. But you run into those types of situations. Any questions? I did present a paper. Yes, ma'am.
No, I just wondered if you looked for any sex differences in there.
I tested hypotheses all over the place and couldn't find any significant differences between, any of the variables based on the sexes. I also, as most of us do with the survey, there's some other stuff that was in the survey aside from this. How many of you guys are familiar with, it's Duckworth's work about grit? You've heard about grit. Okay, so they did grit. I think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, since I got psychology people in here. I think she's a psychologist.
She's a psychologist.
Okay, but that scale was developed off of surveys of people at our military academies. Okay, I don't find the grittiness of that population generalizable to anything. Okay, so I tried to replicate. I've used grit in a couple of different things, and I looked at academic procrastination and grit. I looked at, with some of my stat students, I looked at grit in their performance in the class. I looked at grit's relationship, and this is the short grit, not the long grit scale. Anyway, I looked at grit's relationship with some of this stuff, busting them up into gritty and not gritty, And I think you guys probably have I have a drawer of fairly decently done stuff with no statistically significant result that needs to go to the Journal of Insignificant Results. But, so I've always thought I should do a paper with some of my grit stuff, maybe for a conference, and it'll be Grit Ain't Shit.
So maybe you could talk to Dr. Rita Kirkland in my department, who does research grit and is much more of an expert than I am on grit. But she gave a TED Talk, I don't know, a couple of years ago on grit as well. And then she came and talked about, I think, doing a TED Talk here, if I remember.
Did she find anything?
She's all over grit.
Okay.
She's a big grit believer.
Okay. I just didn't find anything. And so
I don't know if she uses that exact scale or she uses different scales.
I think there's a 14-item scale and an 8-item, but I may be remembering it wrong. But one's called short grit, and then there's the original grit.
Duckworth has used that not just on the military academy. She's used it in a variety of populations. I believe it's not my area.
Oh, I haven't done any reading on it at all for years. I just played with it because it seemed interesting, and then I just didn't find anything with my population of students at Missouri Southern. I also didn't find that much between the procrastinators and the non-procrastinators, frankly, in their performance in the class. And you got some really good students that wait for the last neck-breaking moment, and they do really good work at the last neck-breaking moment.
And so I feel like you'd have to have some other kind of test to go with that to really understand what's, because that's exactly where my mind went when you said that. Well, there are students who are really bright and can play that procrastination game and still succeed.
Mm-hmm. So I use some Blackboard stuff for that. Anybody's ever tried to do date math in Excel, it's hell. Do it by hand. If you haven't got a lot of observations, it's just custom fields. It's not pretty. But more questions? Yes, sir.
So I'm trying to remember one of the variables. If there was a variable about language, I'm kind of curious about.
I think there was a language variable.
Study abroad, like students imagine themselves studying abroad in a place like the UK versus anywhere else in the world, right? It seems like that language limitation is always particularly prohibitive for Americans.
We didn't look at language. I don't think we even collected it. Unfortunately, all I've got right now is a paper copy of the survey. I changed computers, I changed schools. I threw out 30 years worth of stuff when I moved from Missouri Southern, but kept most of this stuff. The language, most of them, especially when they've studied abroad, have gone to institutions where they're taking classes in English, even though they're living in a place where you speak a different language, which is not the bravest thing, but I guess it's functional. It's better than not spending 3 or 4 months. My stepdaughter, Whitney, who's now about, 37? She was a dual major in Spanish and international business. 6-foot blonde. Okay. She goes to the University de las Americas in Chile for a a semester abroad, and the first half of the term was horrible. I mean, she'd taken Spanish, thought she was pretty good, and she said the dialect is really difficult, and it started clicking about halfway through. And then she was fortunate enough to have an internship with the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, and they got like private Spanish tutoring, I think they got. And then she took a job with Moody's in Mexico City. And she's married to a Mexican, so she's just really speaks it well. But she wasn't scared. And I think one of the reasons she wasn't scared is when we were in Geneva, she was 14. She spent half the term with us and was turned loose to ride rollerblades and buses and stuff all over town. And you guys may think that's bad parenting, but that's what everybody does there. The kids take public transportation to school. Not exactly free range, but pretty close to free range kids. And so she got to go and fly at a good time for a kid to understand things and go on trips. And so I think the same thing is really important for college students. I can think of one of our students that went to Geneva. He works at, I want to think, Monash University or somewhere in Dubai. And this was a kid from way the wrong side of the tracks. Coffeyville, Kansas, Lake Charles, Louisiana. So there he is with a career, international career. So it can be a very impactful thing. Look this up. I'm a big fan of it. Anything we can do to get him to do something, I think is great.
It was mainly business. Mainly business students who.
Oh no, we had students from all different majors. So often, like the English faculty, for example, they had a regular study tour that was in Paris, and it was centered around certain authors from literary Paris. I think they taught. Communications faculty would take students, and they would go to some big journalism conference of some sort, and they met with all kinds of journalists and ate in their homes and stuff. Just really interesting tours that a lot of them came up with. Wellness professors and biology professors would go together to Costa Rica and marry in biology with wellness because they would do hikes and a bunch of other stuff. Some of the others, let's see. The business people, was usually around business stuff and go tour different facilities and so forth. And the business school had the luxury of some money, some endowment money that they could use to even add to what the school would use. So, but the leadership set aside enough money, $200,000 or $300,000 a year, to support this. And then with the faculty, the first step was to get the faculty to the point where they were comfortable traveling abroad and so forth. So there were faculty grants for travel and so forth. All the international conferences that I've got made presentations, they paid for all of it. All of it. Everything but the drinks. They wouldn't pay for that after a while. Initially they did. And then they quit. I guess we got audited. And they quit paying for the alcohol and the trips. But otherwise, they paid for it. The goal was to have whoever's the instructor not have to get in their pocket to do this. And they were pretty good about that. I mean, you're always going to get in your pocket when you travel. I don't care whether it's supposedly paid for or not. You always do. But so that worked fairly well. But some funding and then top-level support because the president was very much behind it. And without that, we wouldn't have flown. Yeah.
The other question is, were these faculty-developed programs, or were they? And there's companies that put together package programs.
Primarily faculty-developed, although there was one travel agent in particular that was real good at taking care of a lot of the details. Because when you have a group, you've got to arrange transportation. Sometimes it's got to be bus transportation and so forth. So having somebody that's got some experience and some contacts, coming up with all the details yourself, pretty tough. So yeah, they did use some travel agents for that kind of thing. But it wasn't just going on to another tour that was already done. So it was, but Chris Moose, for example, has quite a few contacts, and he was able to just. And then if we've got industry around Joplin, Missouri, there are some fairly significant industries. Leggett & Platt, for example, that makes bedding components, Fortune 100 company based in Carthage. They've got branches all over the world. So you've got people there. And then you've got some defense contractors and so forth. And then, you just have people because you've got more manufacturing.
So do you have an office on campus for that?
They had an office and an international institute director and a secretary. And I want to think it was probably about a half release. I think he still taught some classes. Chad Stebbins did it. I mean, he may still be doing it. He did it for years, a communications professor. So they had that. And we had language professors that one of the professors would take a group of students, and I forget exactly where in Mexico, I think he was from there, or had relatives there, put students in people's homes, and they would do immersion Spanish for a while. But the professors wouldn't have done it if they didn't have the support to do it. Because it's a heck of a lot of work to organize it. And you're taking part of your break. I mean, there's your 2 weeks in between, spring and summer. You're spent traveling. So I'm not sure exactly how successful they're being, with the budget issues that they've got. They've got serious budget issues right now.
I was just motivated. My question is just looking at it in the sense of logistical nightmare, coordinating all those things.
Oh yeah. Now when we took the students, the 15 students to Webster. Webster's folks just took care of all the details. They were fantastic, because they've been doing international education for a long time, and they had people on the ground that were outstanding. I had to get a visa to teach. They helped with that. So it was a pretty professional bunch. So yeah, there are details for sure. And the professors, Chris in particular, got real good at troubleshooting passport issues and so forth. We've had people that would drive to Chicago and get stuff straightened out from.
Well, that is an issue though. If you're teaching in another country earning money, you need a visa for that.
Yeah, and I got paid by Webster and Missouri Southern at the same time. So, and still went in the hole. It is switching. And we went on vacation with everybody that came to visit. So, all right, cool. Thanks for coming. I really appreciate it. I'll be at yours. Appreciate it. No doubt. So, Sylvia, how you doing?
Hi.
Good. I'm glad you wore a coat. All right. Thanks a lot, guys.